The Blockchain Show is a podcast that demystifies cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. You're listening to another episode of The Blockchain Show. Today, I have a guest who is an expert in technology and emerging tech, and also a fellow podcaster, Mr. Max Sklar. Max, how are you doing today?
Very good, Ethan. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure to have you with me. I know we've been trying to do this for a while, so I appreciate your patience. And
it's fine. It's podcasting. I do my show every week. You do your show. How often is your show?
Once a week.
Once a week. Yeah, it's like when it works, it works.
Yeah, it's a really, it's one of my favorite mediums, and it's really starting to take off. It's kind of exciting to see it kind of come into the popular culture.
Absolutely.
But tell us a little bit more about yourself and your podcast and how you got to be doing what you're doing.
Yeah. So in terms of my work background, I was a software developer and then a machine learning engineer at Foursquare. I joined the company Foursquare way back in 2011, and it sort of combined two passions of mine. One is like mapping technology and location technology, and the other one, it was machine learning, which I got really into in grad school at the time. And so I was working at Foursquare doing that for a while. I met a lot of really cool people working on some really cool projects, and I didn't see a lot of them wouldn't see the light of day, like they're not part of the conversation, and I was like, well that's a shame. So I thought of ways maybe I can get that out, and that led to the podcast. Another thing that led to the podcast was, I spent some time like talking to entrepreneurs and people who are starting businesses, and I was like, well, I don't have an idea right now, but one part of it is, let's figure out how to build an audience. Let's get beyond my just, sitting at a computer coding and build a skill that's worthwhile there. And so that was pro podcast. And the third thing that was pro podcast was I had a radio show way back in undergrad in college that was like my favorite part of being there. That was like back in like 2004 to 2006. And so I was like, yeah, let's do a podcast. I'm going to start by interviewing engineers and product professionals and entrepreneurs who I like what they're doing. And so I started getting stories there, and then I just expanded out from there because, it turned out that, hey, if I'm going to do a weekly podcast, I should talk to everyone I'm interested in. So I branched out to economists. I branched out to historians. I branched out to just other podcasters who had interesting things to say. And so the podcast, it sort of focuses on my background as in machine learning and Foursquare, and I've done everything from like, okay, what is the theoretical basis for machine learning? What is Bayesian inference? All the way up to like, where is emerging tech going? What does the AI industry look like? And so that is the breadth that you get when you listen to the local maximum, I guess. Cryptocurrency and Bitcoin are kind of a big part of the show from the beginning, all the way from episode 5, I guess, when I interviewed Christian Lundqvist, who's a friend of mine who is one of the smartest guys in Ethereum. And basically, as I talked about emerging technology, I realized that cryptocurrency, blockchain is just a huge part of the story. You can't talk about emerging technology in the 2020s and not, like, if you can't write a book about what the emerging technology is for the next 10 years and be like, and ignore blockchain. I feel like we have, it's frustrating for a lot of people because development seems slow. Like you don't have 1 year where everything just takes off yet, but that's the way things work. We have big institutions, big tech companies, whether it's, Facebook and Twitter, that are not necessarily behaving in the interest of their customers. And then you have this other way to run an organization, which is a blockchain, I would say, where it works a little bit differently and maybe has a different mix of pros and cons, hopefully more pros. And so I talk about that a lot.
Yeah, that's excellent. I really like the theme you have there, and I encourage anybody to check out your podcast. Speaking about emerging technologies, blockchain's still an emerging technology. It's still maybe getting past its infancy, but looking back to one of your episodes, I think it was it episode 88 is 83. You were talking about Bitcoin mining and will it consume the world's energy. I remember that used to be a very big...
Yeah, people are really afraid of that. Yeah.
And it kind of made me wonder, like, well, how much energy is being consumed with the traditional financial means? Like, there's no way to really quantify that because it's got to be like exponentially greater when you think about, all the different banks and all their servers But, what are your thoughts on that topic? Do you think that it's kind of like a relevant point or is there still some credence to that?
Yeah, I just think that there's so much noise when it comes to cryptocurrency, and there's some criticisms that are absolutely valid. And then there are, what people call FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. And one of them is like, oh, Bitcoin mining is going to take over the world. It's going to burn up all of our energy. And it's going to warm the globe, and we're going to have nothing left over for any of our other energy needs. And it's just ridiculous on its face. But I thought, okay, actually, I could come up with a pretty airtight argument to help figure this out, because I feel like a lot of people coming into that might not know. They might think, oh, wait a minute, people can mine Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies using with these ASICs and specialized hardware and consume electricity and turn that into value. Why wouldn't everybody just do that? And so it kind of has a intuition to it that I think that people might be concerned. But the argument that so when I started looking at this, I was like, okay, how much energy could this whole ecosystem consume? And the way I approached it was I looked at the block reward. I said, okay, at the time, I think it was, and let's look at Bitcoin, because I don't know what Bitcoin dominance right now is in terms of like market cap. Is it like 60% of the market or something like that? But a lot of my numbers might be out of date. I don't keep on top of them every single day. But I was looking at, okay, let's look at the block reward. I think at the time it was 12.5. Now we've had our halving, and now every 10 minutes it's 6.25 get released to the miners, whichever miner finds the next block. And so it's like, okay, take that number, multiply it by the price, and it's like that is the amount of money that a miner is going to make if they win the block. And so if you are a miner and you have a certain percentage of the network, then your expected value from attempting to mine a block is going to equal, that percentage of the block reward, because only one person can win it. Or only one miner can win it. So you kind of work backwards and you say, okay, the amount invested has to be, unless they really miscalculate, has to be less than the total amount of rewards that you're getting. If you think about it, hey, if you're going to try to win a prize that is $1,000, you're not going to spend more than $1,000 to get it. It just makes a lot of sense. And so I went through some scenarios where the price gets astronomically high. I think the absolute highest case scenario was, someone mentioned like $10 million, absolute highest Bitcoin could be. It doesn't make sense for it to be higher than that. I don't know if that's true, but I was like, okay, let's say if it's that ridiculously high number by 2030. Then it was like, okay, yes, it's a lot of energy if all of that money was being used to mine it, which I don't think is actually going to happen. I think people are going to invest considerably less because there's all this risk involved. But even if there are a few years where where miners are taking a significant amount, you have halvings coming up, and so eventually, I think, I don't have the number in front of me. I think it was at most like it would increase the energy usage of the world by like 1 or 2%. But even if it was that amount, the next time there's a halving, well, you can't invest. You can only invest half as much in it. So so the amount will go down. So that was the basic outline of the argument. A few people tried to bring up, well, they're also after the transaction fees as well, so that could be an issue. But I don't know. I think the transaction fee actually someone has to pay for on the other end. So, I mean, are people going to pay, trillions and trillions of dollars in transactions, or are they going to find a way around it, as a lot of people have done? There's side chains, lightning networks. I mean, if transaction fee rises, those things are gonna get built out too. Or even, and this is controversial in the crypto world, but even like a mini centralized solution, like sending value back and forth on Coinbase, where you're not necessarily sending something on chain, but to avoid a transaction fee that works. So I think that as I dive into this, I realize that this issue gets a lot more complicated than people realize. But bottom line is, no, I'm not worried about the energy costs taking over the world.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. I think there's probably a lot of, like you said, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Maybe some of the traditional financial institutions are trying to suppress, the emerging competition. We've seen that plenty throughout the past few years, and I think the market cap is around 118 billion lately. So it's amazing how that's happening. And something else that I wanted to bring up was a term that I only learned this week called the flippening. And we talked about we had the guest from My Ether wallet, and we were talking about Ethereum overtaking Bitcoin in terms of the biggest cryptocurrency, and they're getting close. It's at about 53.3%. So, I was always wondering, when is Ethereum? What's their role to play in all this? And I know before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about smart contracts, and that really got my interest. It was part of the impetus to doing this podcast with my co-host. Is we almost called it the Ethereum show because we thought that was going to be the one to dominate, but we weren't really sure. And here we are about 4 years later, and we're starting to see, different trends emerge. So what are your thoughts about Ethereum and kind of just where cryptocurrencies are heading in general?
Yeah, I actually heard about the flippening a while ago, back in like 2016 when Ethereum, or was it 2017? It actually is both of those years when Ethereum was getting really hot. And these were like all the memes on the internet, like, people, Bitcoin people, Ethereum people, going back and forth, like, the flippening is when Ethereum takes over Bitcoin. And there was one point where it looked like it was close to happening. I don't know how close it actually got, whether it was 70, 80% of the market cap. Again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if I remember correctly, it was somewhere around there. It turned out that was a very overheated market for Ethereum. However, Ethereum has been the number 2 for a really long time now. I think 5 years. I think briefly when Bitcoin it broke into Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin, all this other stuff. I think briefly Bitcoin Cash maybe was number 2, but didn't stay there for very long. So yeah, you have the number 1 and number 2 for a long time now. Now, does it stay that way? Obviously, no one knows. I feel like my hunch is that Bitcoin's main benefit is that it's really good at having kind of a limited supply schedule and a very well-known supply schedule, whereas Ethereum, might be limited in principle, and I'm less familiar with, the algorithm involved, but it's actually a lot more complicated in terms of like whether it doesn't have that exact like 21 million number that Bitcoin does in terms of how it's governed. Now, that doesn't mean that Ethereum is not important, even if it doesn't reach the market cap, because Bitcoin does one thing which is hold value and transact occasionally, but not that often. Whereas Ethereum, as I'm sure people are aware, is like the world's computer. It's better at building decentralized applications. However, like right now, I feel like the Bitcoin application is the biggest decentralized application you can think of. Decentralized money, decentralized value, and there are going to be a lot of others in that come out, and they're probably going to be built on top of Ethereum because Ethereum's designed for it. Because Bitcoin has such a long way to go, I feel like there's going to be a lot of focus on that in the next few years. But a lot of probably more interesting stuff could be built on Ethereum, is my hunch.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. I think that smart contracts weren't even part of the original idea, and it just kind of came along after it was started, which kind of blew my mind.
Ethereum or Bitcoin?
Ethereum.
Oh, really? Yeah. So Ethereum was really just like, let's build. My understanding is like, let's build like a Turing complete, meaning like, just a decentralized computer where I could run code and it doesn't stop. And that has really interesting like social and legal implications, because it's not really a contract in that like it can be enforced or not enforced. It just is once you run it. I think that's going to take a lot of getting used to.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if I'm promoting a technology that eventually is going to be kind of taken by AI and used to enslave us all. But that's probably a little bit dramatic.
Sometimes I feel like that with AI as well. But then I actually dive into the algorithms themselves and I'm like, oh, we're really far away from getting that smart. But, there are cases, and I've talked to people who've had this happen, where, you make a mistake, one little mistake in the code, and a bunch of money goes missing. It happens. And it's not like a lot of other things in life where things are correctable. And so that's sort of, I feel like in all cryptocurrencies, I would like to see something with better guardrails. I know a lot of people online say, well, everybody has to, take personal responsibility. And it's like, yes, obviously, if I'm going to use this thing, I'm going to take personal responsibility. But, I don't want one wrong move and all your money's gone. Like, can't we think of something a little better than that? And maybe that just means we have to have layers on top of it. Maybe it means there has to be someone that we trust on top of it, which is sort of seems like it, it goes against kind of the original purpose of it. But, maybe if you just can hire professionals, not like, have some group of companies that are kind of professionals and kind of dealing with private keys and sort of insuring against loss and setting everything up so that if there's a mistake, they don't lose that much. I feel like that could be set up very easily, especially maybe with Ethereum or maybe even just in Bitcoin, if they kind of divide keys up into different areas and, make N of M, signing like, hey, I have this key. I have 6 keys, and maybe I need 3 of them to sign the transaction or something like that, or just divide it up into different places. There's so many different things that you could do, but for an individual to do it, it really is overwhelming.
That's true, and it kind of brings me back to an earlier point I had about a different episode of how much does decentralization mean to people. And I think to a core group of people who listen to the show, it's very important. But to the masses, a lot of people don't really, I don't know if it's that they don't care or maybe they don't know enough to worry about it. It's like they want their devices to work and they're willing to make some trade-offs, whether because they're uneducated about their information being sold, that's a privacy issue, or they don't have the time to look into it. A lot of people have multiple jobs and children and that sort of thing. So I like your idea of maybe like a trusted, I don't know what you would call it, but but having different layers to it. So that's an interesting point of view there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if I like the idea of trade-off, but people being more knowledgeable in terms of what the trade-offs are, and you could still benefit hugely by with decentralization and with like the governance model. Like, let's say Bitcoin. Okay, 21 million, you can't create anymore. And I still benefit from that if I have a third-party company handling my keys. The one problem that I have is the idea of not your keys, not your Bitcoin. I've got to trust them. And so I've seen solutions that are kind of halfway, where the individual takes some responsibility and a third party that's trusted takes some responsibility, and there's safeguards in place so they can't screw each other. But I think that the solutions still need to be worked out. The way to educate people still need to be worked out, and it's not going to be as simple. It's going to take a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, that's for sure. And one of the cool things about your podcast is you have a lot of these interesting guests that are all over technology. And even though this podcast kind of focuses on blockchain and distributed ledger technology, there's some really interesting things there. And I'm curious if you wanted to share with us some of the other emerging technologies that you're excited about that also may kind of tie in with blockchain, but might also be a new angle that we haven't really talked about on this show.
Well, sure. I mean, I work in machine learning a lot. I've seen huge changes and shifts in the industry over the last 5 to 10 years. When I was in grad school, I was at NYU, and I took my first really, I don't know how to put it, mathematical class in machine learning. Not mathematical, the other ones were mathematical, but really, how else to say it? Hardcore, we use vector calculus and all that stuff. And that was with Jan LeCun, who I didn't know who he was at the time, but he's become kind of a household name for anyone who does AI and machine learning. And he taught us about deep learning in that course in 2010. And to see it become kind of a mainstream type thing, where now Facebook and Google have these open libraries that people can use and implement it to do whatever kind of learning, a supervised learning, to do classification. That's pretty amazing. But I feel like most companies don't know how to use this power. They just think, I'll throw deep learning at it and it will work, when really a much more a simpler statistical algorithm will work. And so I think that's another case where the market has to work itself out through trial and error over many years, because the deployment of the correct machine learning technology is just as important or more important than the technology itself. But I don't know. I think we're going to see some really cool applications. We already have with AI, and I'm excited about that. I also work at Foursquare, so obviously location-based technology. Now, a lot of that is kind of in the advertising space, which people might not be in love with right now. But location context is very important for a lot of the applications that you use every day. And I'm in kind of a group right now where we don't have to worry about monetization, and we don't have to worry so much about, we could just kind of build a product where we think, yes, this is the future. And we're building sort of a city guide where you can walk around and we know exactly where you're standing, but it's not for the purposes of sending ads to you. It's for the purposes of accessing audio content at just the right time. So essentially it'll be a walking city tour that you can add to. And I'm excited about that prospect. In terms of emerging technologies that I talk about on the show, I'm trying to think of, I guess self-driving cars comes up a lot. I think, and my coworker and I talk, my co-host Aaron and I talk about this a lot. When is self-driving cars going to be available to the public? And we think it's still a ways off, maybe towards the end of this decade. But the social implications of that are going to be very big. I mean, we were talking before this pandemic about, how maybe life in the suburbs, the outer suburbs, might become much more, I want to say palatable, but I feel like a better term. It will become relatively more desirable when you have self-driving cars. It's just a hunch. And so we thought maybe that's a trend we'll see in the future. Then the pandemic hits and we're like, oh, well, maybe that will accelerate this trend. I don't know.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. I'd like to learn more about the city guide tour. It kind of reminds me of some TV shows I watch where they're in the future. They've got these augmented glasses and hearing devices, and they can, there's all these ads popping up around them, and it makes me wonder, like, is this a future we're heading towards where, is this a negative thing or is this a good thing? Because, there's two sides of the coin where maybe you're new to a place and no one's going to show you around, but then you can put on this device, or in our case, it'll probably be like a phone or a watch, and there you go. You can go about the town. So, I mean, that's a really, really cool thing you've done.
Yeah, I mean, in Foursquare's history, a lot of times, I mean, you can go into a lot of case studies about product decisions at Foursquare, good and bad. But I feel like a lot of times we say, okay, let's act in the customer's self-interest, in the user's self-interest, and we do that. But then some other company comes along and says, let's milk them for all they got. And then that company becomes huge. So I don't know what to say, but that's one of the reasons why I really want crypto and blockchain, and I know I'm hand-waving a little bit. I don't know exactly how it will pan out to be sort of the antidote to this big tech social network, big ad or ad network type situation that we're in now. Which, I mean, hey, that's how a lot of revenue is made as Foursquare. I don't think that's going away, but I feel like there's got to be a reaction, a blockchain counter reaction where, no, you're actually just using applications that are looking out for your interest. Maybe you're paying them a little bit through micropayments. I don't know how to get people to use that. I don't know how to get people to start using it. It's very hard to switch people's attention. That like Facebook and Twitter have really got us. But I feel like it's happening. I feel like it's not happening overnight, but a lot of these large social networks are, if you haven't noticed, they're having a hard time kind of with governing themselves and governing their, like, trying to make everybody happy, and they're failing at it. I don't know if you just project this out 10 years, if they keep failing at it, it keeps getting worse and worse. Are people going to still be on it? I don't know. That sounds dystopian to me. Hopefully not. But maybe we could talk a little bit about the application that I'm building, because I was just outside today. I had not seen my coworkers in person since March. And we wanted to launch this product in March. And basically, it's called MarsBot Audio. There'll be a formal announcement about it. I don't know when, but probably in the next couple months or so. I'm really excited about it. It's just for fun. It's just, you're going to walk around the city and you can hear content about things that you're walking by. And I basically created a walking tour for my coworkers at the park, and I used my podcast equipment and I recorded stuff. So when you walk past a tree, I make a comment on the tree. And I feel like somebody can do something a little more interesting than me with that. So it'll be user-generated content, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people do with it. Yeah,
you might put a lot of tour guides out of business.
Or give them more business. Say, hey, if you're a tour guide, come and record your tour on this technology, and have lots of people go on your tours.
That's excellent, because I was just doing a hike with my family yesterday. My goal was to teach flora and fauna to them, and there's lots of plants I knew about, but of course they were asking questions about the ones I didn't know anything about. So I had to say, well, I don't know. We're going to have to look that up.
Yeah. And so imagine, like, if you're pointing things out, but as you're pointing things out, you're kind of recording it into your phone as you go on the trail. Then the next person who goes on the trail can hear you do that if they want and benefit from that.
That's really cool. So how long until someone like me could play around with that?
Well, if you talk to me after the show, I might be able to. If you have an iPhone, I might be able to get you on the demo, the tester group. But I think it will really be in just a few weeks. We really wanted to launch this in March. As you can imagine, March rolled around, and we're like, "Are we going to be ready? We think we're going to be ready." And then look what happened. Everything was shut down, and it was just not a good time to launch it. At some point, I don't want to keep moving it up indefinitely.
Right. Yeah. This is just crazy times still. We're, like in another wave of the COVID-19, and we kind of saw a lot of uprising and outrage. It was kind of strange to me to see so many, like, I don't know what you'd call them, people with Marxist ideas just out in the open. And some of my friends, longtime friends, I would talk to, very intelligent, kind of were sharing similar opinions, and it kind of made me wonder, like, well, I don't know if that's. I mean, I understand, like, I've never read Karl Marx's manifesto, but I've read other takes on it, and it kind of makes me wonder, what would Karl Marx think about cryptocurrency, and is that a good? Is cryptocurrency at a state where it can be kind of like an unstoppable code, like Andreas Antonopoulos said a few years ago, just kind of like subsist with all the like instability that we're facing through pandemics and not so much riots anymore. But what are your thoughts about like kind of like the social implications of cryptocurrencies and blockchain?
Well, I mean, let's just talk about the present moment, because I really think, I don't know where you are. I live in Brooklyn here, and I feel like we've lived through sort of a dystopian moment where we're largely confined to our rooms, and we are obsessed. Maybe obsessed is not the right word. Maybe addicted to social media, and we're kind of just sitting in a room getting pumped with information that's not necessarily in our interest. I mean, I sort of believe it's, I'm pro free speech. I'm open to all information, but we're getting pumped through these apps where it's just people trying to get attention and people sharing memes. And it's just like, you kind of feel like a vegetable being watered by a toxic information environment. And I feel like one of the cures to that might be, once people get out into the real world again and start interacting with each other again, people will get a little more level-headed. I don't know. I drove past City Hall in Manhattan today, and it's pretty. I found it a little scary. Like, I remember 10 years ago when there was Occupy Wall Street. There were a few things but it didn't seem that scary to me. Now, when you look at the graffiti that people are posting and tagging all around the city, and you see everyone kind of powerless to it, I'm like, I don't know. I don't really understand what's going on right now. In terms of Marx and Bitcoin, I don't see how he could like it, because it would interfere with the ability to have a socialist economy.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
But it also interferes with, the ability to have a sort of, I mean, a lot of the reasons for coming up with this stuff was a reaction to, let's say, central bank and nation state currencies that are sort of arbitrarily inflated, or, quantitative easing, and a lot of stuff that, let's just call it money printing, that kind of tips the scale in favor of certain people and other people. But, I like the idea of having something that's as close to objective as possible. And when you have something that's not objective, when the power is there to grab, you'll see people grab it for their own interests, even with something like, even if they don't want to. I feel like the creators of Facebook and Twitter, and I know a lot of people who disagree with me, I think that when they created those things, they wanted it to be free speech, and they wanted open discussion, and they wanted people to work out their differences. I actually think if you talked to Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey when they were creating this, they would say, yeah, that's my vision. But along the way, they're under so much pressure to not follow that. They're under so much pressure to, listen to this group or that group, and, remove that person, amplify that person. And I'm really worried about where that's going.
For sure. Yeah. And there's a lot we could talk about there, and I'm sure everyone has their own thoughts on the matter. But, earlier you were mentioning, we were talking about ads, and I kind of briefly mentioned, but you're working on at the Foursquare's ad attribution product. And could you maybe just tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I worked on attribution at Foursquare from 2017 all the way to the beginning of 2019. And it's kind of an interesting problem. It basically what Foursquare tries to do, or does do pretty successfully, is they take a chain. I use Starbucks as an example a lot. I don't think Starbucks is a client, but it's a good example. And Foursquare has data on which ad IDs were at Starbucks and which weren't. And then Starbucks comes with the information on who saw the ads, when. And you try to build a causality model, and you build a model that says, okay, did this ad actually cause people to go to the place that you wanted them to go? And causality models are fraught with danger. There's a lot that can go wrong when you have a causality model. Like if you break the causal chain, if you try to get because you really want the counterfactual. Like if they had not seen the ad, what would they have done? And if these people had seen the ad, what would they have done? That's very difficult to come up with. You kind of have to. It's a machine learning problem, and it's also a problem of let's make sure we're not, oftentimes you're tracking the targeting, which is what you don't want to do. You don't want to say, okay, this ad just happened to target people who are already going to Starbucks. Well, that didn't do any good to the company, or unless it was a branding play. But it was a really interesting problem to dig into, and I'm glad I did it for a couple years, but I don't feel the need to dive right back into it now. I feel like 2 years was a good amount of time to put into it. And then it turned out in 2019, Foursquare merged with Placed, and Placed is a company that only does location-based attribution. And so it was like, great. It was what we were doing was a success. It helped us merge with this other company. Now I could pass it on to other people. It does give people pause to know that this is going on sometimes, though.
Right. Kind of related. When we're talking about COVID-19, I know that Foursquare is probably, one of the most used location data technology platforms. And it makes me wonder, how this whole COVID tracking that Apple and Google have teamed up to use, what are your thoughts on that? And are there any privacy implications that we're just kind of being pushed to do this, or is there a better way to do contact tracing?
Yeah. So Foursquare in particular, we have sort of our recovery index at visitdata.org, and that sort of shows in aggregate, like, hey, gyms were at this in February. Now gyms are at this visit rate. And this is what happened to bars, and you can search by county and state and that sort of thing. So that's sort of an interesting thing to check out. I think I'm concerned with contact tracing apps. Everyone wanted to build a contact tracing apps, and when we dove into it, we saw two problems with that. One is it could give people a false sense of security because you're not tracing everybody. And if you say, well, you never came into contact with anyone who was sick, so you're okay, you could never actually say that. And secondly, just the lack of privacy and the lack of consent of people just being of going around being traced, and it's not accurate. I don't know if I walk past someone on the street who's sick. I don't think that's a particularly strong vector of transmission for the virus. I'm not worried about it. I was worried about it, the first month because we didn't know that much about it. But these days, I'm not worried about passing someone on the street. So I don't see what good these things can do at this point. I think maybe look at places that you sit down for a long period of time, like an indoor work or a bar or something like that.
Yeah, that was visitdata.org if anybody's interested. It's kind of fun to look at data. That's one of my favorite subreddits is Data is Beautiful.
Oh, yeah. I'm a big fan of that one as well.
Well, cool, Max. It's fascinating talking to you. I know we went over time, so I think that's a good indication. If anybody has enjoyed this as much as me, check out Max's podcast. So tell us where we can find you and where to learn more.
Oh, yeah. So for the website for the podcast is localmaxradio.com. You could also just look on your podcast app and whichever one you're using and just look for the local maximum. And I've got everything from abstract mathematics to, historians and economists. I did one interesting one recently where I was talking about the Electoral College, and I started by interviewing an elector who is part of the Electoral College, just asking him about his experiences. And then I just dove into social choice theory, like Boolean monotone functions and Shapley values and Arrow's impossibility theorem and all that. And so I kind of like to mix that up and always attempting at least to make it accessible to a general person and explaining what these terms are. So my hope is that you'll be entertained and you'll get smarter.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent, and I think that people will definitely that will definitely happen for people. So, Max, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Same here. It's been a pleasure.